In the video dedicated to Universal Year 7, we explored through the Tarot of Marseille how the human being is called to undergo a profound transformation, transitioning from an animal state to a royal or divine state. The Tarot invited us to take this royal path symbolized by the Chariot card, encouraging each of us to evolve, to break free from earthly conditionings, to integrate our animal part, and to enter into a dynamic of spiritual elevation. At that stage, the teaching was to understand that the animals depicted in the tarot represent those unconscious, often untamed energies that dwell within us and can devour us if we do not master them. To tame these energies is to confront them, to name them, and thereby transform them into creative allies. The High Priestess, symbolizing the sacred feminine and our unconscious, revealed to us this essential universal law. Everything we experience externally reflects what we carry within. Last year, the Universal Year 8, under the weight of justice, we were confronted with our inner truth, invited to observe ourselves impartially and lucidly. This card confronted us with our deepest contradictions, reminding us that we are as much creators as destroyers of our reality. Justice emphasized the importance of integrating our shadow sides in order to progress, insisting on the awareness necessary for our personal and collective evolution. We also recalled the 7 universal laws, especially the law of mentalism, according to which all is spirit, and our reality is a direct manifestation of our beliefs and thoughts. This understanding urged us to take full responsibility for what we create and experience, by consciously mastering our vibrations, our inner rhythms, and our intentions. The symbolism of the sword and the scales of justice stressed the essential union of matter and spirit within each of us. This inner harmonization was presented as the key to elevating our individual consciousness and thus, by extension, the collective consciousness. Today, as we enter Universal Year 9, let us keep these precious teachings in mind. Let us remember that true evolution involves the conscious integration of our past experiences, the honest recognition of our inner patterns, and the commitment to an enlightened and unified consciousness. And this integration is the primary teaching of this Year 9. For in this Universal Year 9, we are entering what can be called the dark night of the soul. The figure of the Hermit in the Tarot of Marseille has long intrigued me, especially at this stage of the journey, where he turns toward the card of justice. According to many interpretations, this old man symbolizes Saturn and the notion of time coming to an end, while already announcing a renewal. Like a fetus preparing to leave the womb and enter an unknown world, the Hermit embodies both the end of a cycle and the announcement of a future filled with potential. This analogy with the fetus reminds us of the terrible father, in the myth of Saturn Kronos, who devoured his children for fear of being overthrown by one of them. Today, this myth resonates particularly powerfully in our troubled world, marked by turmoil and fear of an uncertain future. We are living in a time where many are stifling their most authentic aspirations, their deepest dreams, prisoners of a system or a collective fear that devours creativity, hope, and inner light. By sacrificing the inner child, we are symbolically repeating Saturn's terrible act, limiting our potential for renewal out of fear of change, apparent chaos, or letting go. The Hermit turning toward justice calls us precisely to examine this inner dynamic. He symbolizes the necessary confrontation with our resistances, our fears, and our conditionings. It is only by traversing this dark night of the soul, this radical phase of introspection, that we can allow a new consciousness to emerge. A consciousness capable of facing external turmoil with wisdom, discernment, and deep lucidity. Thus, the Hermit becomes the guide who leads us toward a renewed inner truth, one that alone can transform the chaotic world around us. From an astrological point of view, Saturn stands at the edge of the planetary septenary. It is the last planet visible to the naked eye before plunging into the universe of the three transpersonal planets, invisible to the human eye: Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Saturn thus represents the ultimate threshold, the gateway that can grant us access to an elevation beyond the individual ego. It is a passage from the human to the divine, a gateway to an unlimited space accessible only to pure consciousness, opened by Uranus, master of the higher intuitive mind. Uranus symbolizes the creative power capable of destroying the worn-out structures imposed by Saturn and of initiating a new seed of life. The celestial arc of the so-called personal planets begins with the Sun, whose glyph, by the way, can be found above the lantern held by the Hermit, and ends with Saturn, master of time and boundaries. But what kinship exists between, on one hand, the radiant brilliance of gold symbolized by the Sun, and on the other, the dull appearance of lead symbolized by Saturn? Between this expansive, generous warmth, and this coldness that condenses and contracts? What balance can be found between the Sun, which generously dispenses its light, and Saturn, which symbolizes restraint, economy, even restriction? And above all, how are we going to live through this Saturnian year we have entered? A year whose weight is already profoundly felt? How can the Hermit card guide us through the turmoil that is today's world? Saturn, ruler of the zodiac sign that inaugurates winter in astrology, imposes the limits of reality upon the being, and at times, like now, his lead in nature becomes unbearable, when everything grows heavier and the world appears in a darker light. Saturn operates at the very heart of life's concrete circumstances, as they are, not as we would like them to be. Opposed, astrologically speaking, to the Moon, which we symbolically find in both the hood and the inner lining of the Hermit's cloak, Saturn is devoid of indulgence. For him, things are simply what they are and allow no room for sentiment. The symbolic presence of the Moon in the lining of the cloak, at the very core of the garment that envelops the entire body, suggests that the unconscious, symbolized by the Moon, internally structures his entire being. And its presence in the hood, which is meant to cover the head, the seat of the mind and conscious thoughts, could be interpreted as the Hermit now becoming aware that he has allowed his rational thinking, up to this point, to be influenced by the subconscious forces of the Moon and his deep emotions. That what he perceives on the outside is but a broadcast, a reflection of the emotional world he carries within. The fact that the lunar symbol is present both at the bottom, in the cloak's lining, associated with the material and bodily realm, and at the top, in the hood, associated with the mental and spiritual realm, underscores an essential idea, that of a vertical unity between the conscious and the unconscious, between matter and spirit. This dual localization reveals that the Moon, universal symbol of the unconscious, deep emotions, and internal rhythms, completely permeates the Hermit, from the densest to the most subtle, clearly indicating a desire for total integration. The Hermit thus teaches us that true spiritual wisdom does not consist in rejecting the material world or withdrawing from it, but in harmoniously connecting the lower and the higher, the inner and the outer, the concrete and the abstract. Placed at the level of the head, the moon reminds us that intuition, imagination, and emotional receptivity illuminate our conscious perception. It is the subtle source from which inspiration and intuitive wisdom arise. Also present in the lower part, it shows that the unconscious is equally rooted in the body, in instincts, buried memories, and repressed emotions. True wisdom cannot ignore or reject these embodied dimensions, it must welcome and fully integrate them. In this way, the hermit becomes the living symbol of an enlightened consciousness that never forgets its roots, knowing that to reach true wisdom, one must unite above and below, and become fully vertical by reconciling spirit and matter, light and shadow, Saturn and the moon. This dual lunar presence thus indicates that the hermit does not reject his unconscious. On the contrary, he recognizes it as an essential force and allows himself to be completely permeated by this lunar dimension. By consciously integrating what is hidden in the shadows of his psyche, he accesses a true wisdom capable of navigating the turmoil of today's world. In other words, this wisdom does not arise solely from a rational Saturnian consciousness but draws deeply from the hidden forces of the unconscious. The ability to link the raw reality we experience with our deepest emotions is precisely what will allow us to face the current trials of the world with lucidity and balance. This raw reality associated with Saturn is often perceived as a prison, the Saturnian prison. It represents the concrete situation in which we find ourselves, with its constraints, frustrations, and trials. But whereas traditional astrological literature often reduces Saturn, whose name derives from Satan, to a malevolent figure of hardship and suffering, the perspective offered by the hermit encourages us toward a higher understanding, for here we find the highest hand of the tarot. Eric Barrett points out, and I quote, "What makes Saturn the impartial master that he is that he confronts us with our ability to take things as they are and to act with integrity. He is both the obstacle that stops us and the attitude that allows us to face it. Saturn leads us precisely to Saturnize ourselves. That is, to become fully responsible for our lives. The prison of Saturn touches the very heart of our evolution, for it seems to be the means by which life has found a way to free us from illusion and from identification with its walls. Jung said in this regard that prison is, from a certain angle, a symbol of the self. Saturn is therefore not merely a limitation. He is also a powerful initiator toward a broader consciousness. He is the guardian of thresholds, between the human and the divine, between unconsciousness and inner mastery. Carl Gustav Jung, in fact, associates Saturn with the individuation process, that is, the being's ability to structure itself in full awareness, without being dominated by external forces. Without limits, there is neither form nor discernment. Saturn confronts us with the immutable laws of existence, time, responsibility, cause and effect, among others, compelling us to relinquish our illusions and to face reality as it is. Unfortunately, in light of our current world, we remain our own jailer. We are so attached to the external world, to which we give all power, constantly reacting to it, again and again, endlessly. In doing so, we lose sight of our inner world and find ourselves in exile from our true self. In a sense, we banish ourselves, losing awareness of our inner light, turning our backs on our divine core. And ultimately, we create our own enslavement, our own domination. But, I repeat, the Saturnian prison is not a fatality. It is an initiation. Rigidity, trial, and solitude are there to teach us to see beyond, to break our own chains. For if Saturn is lead, he also carries within him the seed of gold, as in alchemy. He is not only weight, he is also wisdom, and he is the one who transforms man into a being of light. In the Hermit card, the lantern is placed before him, yet partially hidden beneath his cloak. This inner light is not yet fully revealed, because Saturn first demands a work of purification. Light can only emerge after a descent into oneself, after accepting the weight of existence. The famed, dark night of the soul, is a Saturnian passage. A moment where everything seems to collapse, where illusion is shattered, but where the true essence of the being can finally arise. The proposal brought to us by the Hermit today is to grow, not in size or age, as the card might suggest, but in responsibility, in autonomy, in inner verticality. We are experiencing a year of assessment, 9, harvesting what we have sown, the Saturnalia, not only through our actions, but also through our thoughts, beliefs, emotions, and intentions. This is what the Hermit teaches us at this stage, that our life is our own creation. Look at the bottom of his red robe, it forms a right angle. Is this not a construction? Perhaps a reference to the Tower card? And if his legs are imprisoned in a rigid structure, how can he move, except from above? Thus, our individual energies contribute directly to the collective reality. They are what shape the field of reality in which we evolve together as humanity. When groups of people share similar beliefs or energies, they contribute to the creation of a collective climate that influences global, social, and cultural events. This is how mass movements, social transformations, or worldwide crises emerge, not only because of individuals' direct actions, but also through the convergence of their intentions and collective energies. Let us keep in mind that the Hermit, who is soon to encounter the Wheel of Fortune, is preparing his own karma, and that we are invited, in this Saturnian period of global turmoil, to become fully responsible for our individual and collective creation. For only the verticality of our consciousness, illuminated by the deep and demanding wisdom of Saturn, will allow us to transcend our inner prisons and reclaim the freedom of our divine essence. The number 9 carried by the Hermit arcana also conveys this teaching. This 9 possesses fascinating and unique mathematical properties, since any multiple of 9 always returns to 9. As if every experience multiplied along our path constantly brings us back to ourselves, painfully reminding us how much we remain prisoners of a linear, rigid, and constraining time, imposed by Saturn, who structures and crystallizes our lives. But this Saturnian time can be transcended. This is precisely what is symbolically indicated by the Hermit's lantern, whose light guides us toward another dimension of existence. Time is, in reality, a subjective construction, an illusion created by our consciousness. We know that a child perceives time differently from an adult, or that pleasant moments always seem shorter than those of suffering or waiting. The broken clock visible in the lining of the Hermit's cloak is eloquent. It symbolizes our limited, partial, and dualistic perception of time. This dual perception traps us in a fragmented reality, where we only see one aspect of things, ignoring the other side of the real. So, is the world a deception of our mind? An error of our sight? The present is one, indivisible. And yet, the idea of it only appears alongside that of a before and an after. Thus, the idea of linear succession is introduced. But is it legitimate to attribute reality to time as we perceive it? The lantern the Hermit holds in his right hand might answer this question, for since it does not light far ahead of him, its glow can only spread over his steps, step by step, illuminating only the present moment. 3 conceptions of time present themselves to us: linear time, chronos, Saturn. This is material time, which imposes limits, deadlines, assessments, and the constraints of the physical world. Cyclical time, Ion. This is time eternally renewed, embodied by the Wheel of Fortune that follows the Hermit. It teaches us that everything returns, in different forms. Thus, to understand Saturn is to grasp the cycles and cease to be a slave to them. The eternal moment, Kairos, a liberated time, lived in the present instant, where past and future no longer dominate us. This dimension is accessible through the awakening of intuitive consciousness, symbolized by Uranus. Thus, the true role of Saturn in our human experience is not only to impose limits, but also to offer us the opportunity to transcend them through the elevation of our consciousness. We are prisoners of time only because we believe in its absolute reality. Yet by understanding that it is merely a mental construction, we can transcend it. The Saturnian prison then becomes an initiatory place, a gateway to higher consciousness, opened by Uranus, revealing a time freed from linear constraints. Hence the essential question: how can we transform the Saturnian trial into a key for evolution? While the Justice card confronted us with ourselves and pushed us to descend into our depths to detect the source, while it taught us that consciousness is built within the unconscious, the Hermit now invites us to rise and to look back on our most recent life experiences. The review of what has been lived offers a new perspective, a revision, before moving on, or not, to the next stage. For no one is freed from what they have not seen within themselves and accepted fully. Thus, Universal Year 9, under the guidance of the Hermit, proves to be a demanding period, much like that of a final year student seeing the final exam drawing closer day by day. The student knows that they must discipline themselves to regular revision in order to more easily succeed and obtain their diploma. The very meaning of "to revise" takes on full significance here, since it is about examining once again in order to correct. We are thus speaking of an alchemical process, unfolding over time, allowing the inner sun to be gradually revealed. This is the transmutation of lead, Saturn, into gold, Sun. It is the unveiling of one's true nuclear and original identity, of one's truth, of what is, in other words, Gnosis, the supreme knowledge according to Hermetic teachings. We therefore return to the three celestial bodies, Saturn, the Sun, and the Moon, which summarize all things according to three fundamental dimensions. What exists on the inner plane, linked to physical sensation and emotional resonance, corresponds to the Moon. It refers to personal, intimate, and subjective experience. The Moon represents our unconscious, our emotions, our illusions, and our deep conditioning. Present both in the hood and the lining of the Hermit's cloak, it symbolizes how the unconscious permeates the entirety of our being. From matter to spirit, from bodily sensations to spiritual intuitions. It reflects our inner perceptions, often fluctuating, inviting us to understand that our inner reality constantly projects outward. What exists on the outer plane, corresponding to objective circumstances inscribed in space and time, is linked to Saturn. Saturn represents raw reality, the concrete, and the boundaries imposed upon us by existence. As the master of time, of limits, and of structure, Saturn confronts us relentlessly with our responsibilities. He is the one who constrains and places us before trials, within a rigorous framework, demanding deep inner discipline. In doing so, he compels us to move beyond the illusions of the Moon, beyond emotional attachments, in order to attain maturity and embodied wisdom. This Saturnian prison then becomes a necessary initiatory stage for freeing ourselves from identification with our own inner walls. What lies at the very heart of all things, beyond lunar illusions and Saturnian constraints, is the sun. It represents the essential identity, the inner light that transcends both the lunar reflections and Saturn's rigidity. It is the creative principle, the awakened consciousness, the reunified self, where the individual merges with the universal. This is the accomplished state, the fruit of an initiatory journey through which the being has fully integrated the lessons of time and experience. These three celestial bodies form an essential initiatory triad, within which the Hermit stands in this universal year 9. The Moon, representing emotional and receptive energy, first confronts us with our inner perceptions, unconscious conditioning, and deep emotional landscapes. The Hermit reminds us that wisdom can only arise through the recognition and integration of this subjective dimension. Saturn, associated with discipline, rigor, and mental structure, then comes to channel these lunar energies, preventing their dispersion. Saturn demands a direct confrontation with outer reality, allowing the individual to grow in spiritual maturity and to become fully responsible for their existence. Finally, the Sun represents the energy of inner alignment, of unity and spiritual fulfillment. It symbolizes the culmination of this inner alchemy, the transmutation of Saturnian lead into spiritual gold, accomplished through the inner work illuminated by the lantern held by the Hermit. The inner light of the Sun appears only after one has crossed the lunar trials of illusion and the Saturnian constraints of discipline and limitation. It is only through these ordeals that the being awakens to true self-knowledge and radiates authentic wisdom. The symbolic dynamic among these three celestial forces, as lived under the guidance of the Hermit, constitutes a genuine initiatory process, in which each stage is essential to the emergence of our inner light. It is not about fleeing from material or emotional reality, but rather transcending it by integrating it within a unified verticality. This is precisely the Hermit's teaching this year: to deeply review our past experiences, to fully accept them, in order to transform the Saturnian trial into a key for evolution. We then discover that our true inner light, our inner sun, does not depend on the fluctuations of lunar emotions nor on the rigid limits of Saturn, but that it is revealed precisely through them, beyond apparent polarities. It is there, in this restored verticality, that our true creative power resides, in the awareness that our inner reality profoundly shapes what we experience externally. Such is the path proposed by the Hermit, a path toward our true essence, our inner and luminous truth. A path marked by diverse experiences, for here, knowledge alone is not enough. To move from knowledge to true understanding, we must feel it in our bodies, experience it, and confront it through lived reality. For knowledge can only be acquired from within. Thus, from a state of tension between two poles, inner and outer, or thesis and antithesis, we move toward a higher unity that integrates these differences into a more complete and balanced vision, synthesis. This is precisely what the Hermit's staff reveals, as its tip rests on the third of the 9 lines on the ground, emphasizing that all authentic knowledge must be acquired through the body. In other words, we must fully embody knowledge, we must become wisdom itself. This timeless wisdom then transcends the world of daily life and linear time to access an eternal truth, that of the thrice great Hermes Trismegistus, to whom is attributed the Corpus Hermeticum, literally translated as the body of Hermetic knowledge. The Hermit thus reminds us that true spirituality cannot be reduced to just another activity to consume within our modern society, which is dominated by the constant injunction to do. This endless race to accumulate knowledge, experiences, or practices often feeds the illusion of spiritual progress, while remaining superficial. The Hermit, on the contrary, invites us to a radical inner reversal. He urges us to step away from outer agitation and enter into a deep quest for being. He teaches us that it is not about doing more, but about transforming ourselves from within, abandoning control, and letting go of the identification with our practices or beliefs, in order to access an authentic, simple, and natural presence. However, this transition from doing to being is not easy. In our current world, built on performance, outcome, and speed, detaching from action often generates fear, emptiness, and discomfort. We unconsciously believe that our value depends on what we accomplish, whereas the true inner revolution consists precisely in letting go of that illusion. This passage involves accepting inner silence, giving up the constant need to control, analyze, or measure our progress. The hermit fully embodies this state. By slowing down, withdrawing from outer noise, he becomes the living embodiment of the subtle wisdom of non-action, not passivity, but rather deep listening, total presence to oneself and the moment. And this individual evolution toward pure being does not stop with the one who lives it. It resonates far beyond, profoundly influencing the entire human collective. Each human being is like a cell in the great organism of the universe. When one cell heals itself, it gradually heals the entire body to which it belongs. Likewise, every individual who raises their own consciousness, who truly integrates their inner light, emits a positive ripple capable of influencing the entire collective consciousness. This phenomenon, known as the Maharishi effect, clearly shows that a critical mass of awakened individuals is enough to trigger a global transformation. Thus, the greatest revolution of all time will not be an external one imposed by ideologies or political movements, but a silent, inner revolution, the evolution of individual consciousness toward unified consciousness. Every human being carries within them the sacred responsibility to reveal their own light, knowing that by doing so, they naturally become a channel through which universal consciousness manifests on Earth. We then realize that each individual is a unique expression of universal consciousness, just as each ray of light is a unique expression of the sun. In this realization lies our true creative power. By awakening individually, by transcending lunar illusions and Saturnian limitations, we access the inner solar radiance. Our life becomes a direct manifestation of that light, a living synthesis of being and doing, an embodied incarnation of wisdom. And it is here that true collective unity arises, not through the negation of our individuality, but through the realization that we are all intrinsically connected to the one consciousness. Every human being, by walking this path inward, actively contributes to the collective awakening, to this turning point toward a humanity unified by the light of consciousness. Thus, in this universal year 9, the Hermit reminds us that authentic wisdom is not taught solely through books or words. It is embodied in the flesh, engraved in lived experience. It is precisely by fully embodying what we inwardly know that we concretely participate in this magnificent revolution of collective evolution. This is the profound meaning of the Hermetic message the Hermit offers us today. To become ourselves the truth we seek, to fully embody it, and to allow this revealed light to radiate across all humanity. We find the number 3, root of 9, appearing repeatedly and in many forms within this arcana. As we've seen, the 3 celestial bodies, Sun, Moon, and Saturn. The clock stopped at the 3rd hour, and the staff pointing to the 3rd line on the ground. Then there is the lantern with its 3 visible faces topped with triangles, the 3 fingers holding it, the 3 horizontal lines located at the level of the third eye, the lock of hair on the right side of the forehead divided into 3 parts, the reference to thrice great, and likely other symbols yet to be discovered. Clearly, something fundamental is expressed through this symbolic number, naturally inviting us to turn toward the Empress, who represents the Trinity, the Word, and the Spirit. She is the one who carries the Spirit, as a creative vibration, into manifestation, and through her representation, evokes the archetype of the birth of the sun. In this depiction, we count precisely 31 triangles, revealing the 3 that gives birth to unity. Thus, the Trinity symbolized by the number 3, the number of relationship, forms the very structure of the universe and of the human spirit. It outlines the philosophical path beyond tension and conflict, whose hallmark is the 2. In other words, it resolves contradictions and gradually leads us toward an absolute relationship, a higher unity that integrates all differences into a complete and harmonious vision, the one consciousness. This Trinity, on the human scale, is represented by a triangle that defines our framework of expression. In the Hermit arcana, 3 triangles stand out in particular, 2 at the top of the lantern, with the third side, facing the Hermit's gaze, being a square symbolizing tangible manifestation in our material world, and a third triangle subtly suggested by the 3 horizontal lines located at the level of the third eye. I would like to pause for a moment on this last point. The individual expresses consciousness in 3 fundamental ways. All forms of self-expression are variations of these 3 basic modalities of consciousness: thoughts, emotions, and actions. Our thoughts are the creators of our experience. Everything that exists must first exist as a thought before it can be manifested. Our thoughts, then, can be seen as the creator God of our experience, the Father of this Trinity, the Yang of consciousness. Next come emotions, the Yin of consciousness. They are the holistic side of the mind, the essence, the feminine aspect of consciousness. Our emotions are the spirit in which we act. This is the sacred feminine or the mother within the Trinity, the Holy Spirit. It is the inner expression of our consciousness, what we feel, and the masculine aspect is what we do. We have a thought, we experience a feeling about it, and then we act in the world accordingly. Our actions are this third aspect of consciousness. We perform actions through the body, and since our actions are the offspring of thought and emotion, they are thus the child, the Son. One might say this is the divine child of the Trinity. But how is this reflected in our physiology and in the structure of our brain? It seems essential to me to understand how the brain is structured and how its various complexes function, in order to grasp what is truly happening within us. Our brain is divided into 3 subcomplexes. In fact, we have 3 brains functioning in unison as one. These 3 systems are the reptilian brain, located at the base, composed of the brainstem and the cerebellum. This part of the brain governs our survival instinct. It regulates our motor functions and everything related to our interaction with the physical world, movement, basic survival needs such as food, shelter, and protection. The reptilian brain is concerned with what is material and with our daily survival in the physical world. The second subsystem is the limbic brain. This is the part that governs our emotions and enables the body to express them. It essentially pumps various chemical components, neuropeptides, that make us feel the consequences of what we do in life. This limbic brain can be seen as the intuitive aspect of the brain that generates emotions. It includes the hypothalamus, hippocampus, amygdala, pineal gland, and pituitary gland. It is the intermediate brain. The third part, which many mistakenly consider to be the entire brain, is actually the most complex subsystem. It is what makes us human. This is the neocortex, also called the human brain. It is responsible for complex and abstract thinking. Everything that distinguishes us from animals originates here. Art, science, speech, writing. These are all neocortical functions. These three regions of the brain can be seen as symbolic analogues of the Trinity of consciousness previously discussed. The reptilian brain is all about control. It is the part that drives us to control our environment in order to survive. It can be likened to the God of the Old Testament, obsessed with laws, order, and domination. This is the dominant aspect. The reptile is a creature of instinct, cold-blooded, emotionless, and concerned with nothing but survival. The sacred feminine, or Holy Spirit, corresponds to the intermediate brain, the limbic system. It generates our emotions, the spirit in which we act. It is, therefore, the feminine aspect of the brain. And finally, the most important is the neocortex, because it is the source of all our human qualities. Without it, we would be incapable of anything that defines us as human. It can be seen as the light, the part that separates us from the animal realm. It is the divine child, the product of the two other brains. The reptilian brain is father, the limbic brain is mother, and together they give birth to the neocortex, the light of the world, so to speak. The prefrontal neocortex was known by the ancients as the third eye. It is the area responsible for our highest level of thinking, and it is the seat of elevated consciousness in our physiology. Thus, these three parts of the brain, also referred to in scientific language as the triune brain, form a symbolic parallel to the aspects and energies of consciousness we have been discussing, reflected in the three horizontal lines we see on the hermit's forehead. I may repeat myself, but I believe it is crucial to understand how these brain complexes function, and what happens when they become imbalanced. I will return to this point shortly. For now, we must understand that the neocortex is bilaterally symmetrical. It is divided into two distinct halves called hemispheres. We thus have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere, each responsible for different functions. The left hemisphere governs, among other things, logic, analytical thinking, mathematics, and science. It is the masculine side of the brain, fact-based, numerical, oriented toward the physical world and reason. The right hemisphere functions very differently. It is more holistic, governing spiritual thought and intuition. It is the creative center of the person. Artistic abilities, and all forms of creativity, stem from this side. It is the feminine side of the brain. We therefore carry both the feminine and the masculine, and neither is superior to the other. What matters is balance, like the yin and yang energies. These two aspects must exist in complementarity, must unite and function in harmony. They are the two yellow faces of our lantern, whose light merges into a beautiful, central red flame. In other words, a person who is consciously awakened, like our hermit, has a balanced brain and uses both hemispheres in concert. This is how the prefrontal cortex, which governs the highest level of thought, comes alive. This awakening could be called the opening of the third eye, but it can only happen when both hemispheres are in alignment. So how does our brain function as a whole when one of the two hemispheres completely dominates the other? We could say that the neocortex, the upper part of the brain, acts as the command center of all the brain's subcomplexes. In this sense, the neocortex is like the CEO of a company. It's the one making the executive decisions. If this area becomes impaired or stops functioning properly, executive control of the entire brain, including the three subcomplexes, gets shifted to one of the remaining two brains. These decision-making functions are then transferred either to the limbic brain, the emotional, intermediate brain, or to the reptilian brain, the instinctive, lower brain. If a person becomes imbalanced toward the left hemisphere, as is often the case today, the neocortex can no longer function properly. This causes a shutdown of the limbic brain. The individual can no longer cultivate emotions through a holistic cohesion of both brains. When functioning solely from the left hemisphere, a person exhibits very little intuitive, emotional, or creative capacity. The limbic system becomes deactivated, and the neocortex operates suboptimally due to this imbalance. As a result, the reptilian brain takes over, and the person begins to behave in a reptilian manner, controlling, dominating, accumulating. This is what we observe in our society today. People cut off from their emotional compass, disconnected from what they feel about what they do to others. These individuals become cold-blooded. They no longer care about how their actions affect others. All that matters is me. It doesn't matter who I have to crush, becomes the unconscious mindset when driven by the reptilian brain. Whether something is right or wrong no longer matters, only what serves my own interest. It's as if the hermit could only see one face of his lantern, the one directly in front of his eyes, crowned by a square, illuminating only the self. We see the opposite effect when the imbalance favors the right hemisphere. Once again, the neocortex becomes partially deactivated, no longer functioning properly to fulfill the executive role of the brain. In this scenario, the person loses connection with the reptilian brain and thus becomes indifferent to what happens in the physical, material world. It doesn't matter if their body is in poor condition, if they lack basic necessities for survival. It doesn't matter if they are externally controlled, stripped of their rights, or mistreated. In this case, the person is being led by the emotional brain, the limbic system. There is not enough influence from the masculine left hemisphere, because the feminine aspect of the right hemisphere has overwhelmed the consciousness. The limbic brain takes over as the executive center, and the person loses touch with survival instincts. Only the outer face of the hermit's lantern is illuminated, disconnecting the person from their own inner light. Ultimately, this is what's happening today. Our brains are being driven into imbalance, whether toward the left or the right hemisphere, and their natural state is being degraded. When the imbalance leans toward the left brain, the reptilian brain takes over, and we behave like dominators, like masters. When the right brain dominates, we lose touch with survival instincts, are ruled by our emotions, and begin to act like slaves. Whether in family, romantic, professional, or social settings, some seek control and domination, while others surrender to any form of control presented to them. In truth, most of us carry both imbalances. We are masters and slaves simultaneously. We tend to try to control those we consider beneath us, and we submit to those we perceive as above us, within this hierarchy of control. And this, in the end, creates all the problems we see in the world. What we observe is that consciousness is largely torn by an imbalance in favor of masculine energy. This stems from the suppression of emotion, of the Holy Spirit, the Divine Mother, the feminine aspect of our consciousness. Our emotions are so repressed, ignored, and ultimately killed. The sacred feminine, which is emotional, intuitive, and compassionate, is being suppressed in our world, leaving dominance to the masculine energy, the yang principle, which seeks to control us. And yet, what we truly need is to reunite these two forces, to help them reach balance and exist harmoniously within each one of us. One does not need to be a visionary to foresee what lies ahead on a collective level during this year 9. No matter where we are in the world, our social class, political beliefs, or circumstances, the pressure will continue to intensify, with the sole purpose of amplifying the imbalance I've described at length. We need only turn to the minor arcana, which reflect our earthly experiences. Consider, for instance, the 9 of Cups, where each cup is compartmentalized, each emotion confined. Or the 9 of Wands, symbolizing our vital fire, yet showing no vegetation, no life, nothing able to sprout from our old reference points or aging structures. It is the image of a desert crossing, where the old man exhausts himself seeking in vain an external light. But the old man fades as the new man is born, as he discovers within himself his own inner master, revealed through the Holy Trinity. Entering into this union leads him to live unity and harmony in diversity, as illustrated in the 3 of Pentacles, where the top pentacle, the divine Son, sits at the center of a heart, thereby releasing the Holy Spirit, the sacred feminine, this third cup rising from the heart, freed from its casing. For this sacred alliance, first allows the father to fully embody his role of protector with wisdom, to help the child nurture self-confidence and accompany them on the path of realization and the awakening of inner capacities. This is echoed in the Three of Wands, whose image reminds me of the 2x3 spokes of the Wheel of Fortune, arcana of destiny, which, in my view, expresses better than any other the intangible presence of its central point. We find the same idea in the Roman numeral X, representing 10, a number that, in many cultures, symbolizes consciousness. The Hermit, through his number 9, prepares us precisely for this crucial step toward awareness. 10. Inviting us to engage in a deep inner review and to cultivate a conscious balance between our thoughts, emotions, and actions. This inner alchemical process eventually allows us to discover the true hub of our being. Thus, the Wheel of Fortune only continues and completes this initiatory journey. It shows us that the final realization of the inner Trinity does not lie in clinging to high positions or fleeing the lower ones, but in finding the absolute center, the invisible hub, where true peace resides. This is why the number 10 symbolizes consciousness. It reminds us that at the very heart of life's perpetual motion, there exists an eternally stable and aware center. By reaching this center, symbolized by the hub, we fully integrate the inner Trinity expressed by the Hermit, and finally transcend the repetitive cycles of existence. The true message of both the Hermit and the Wheel of Fortune is thus clear. To become the consciousness at the center of the wheel, to be that stable hub, beyond all duality, so that we may truly live unity within the diversity of earthly experience. In our particularly turbulent times, everything seems to be falling apart precisely so that we can no longer find security in the usual external structures. You know, when there's nothing left to hold onto in the outer world, when we can no longer identify with our material life, when we lose our bearings, when we lose our reason for living, then we are left with no other choice but to force ourselves onto the path of returning inward. It's a difficult process, sometimes brutal, like a sword piercing through us, yet from it can emerge a deep reaction, a call of the soul that we have so often ignored. So it is not a fatality, but rather an opportunity to carry our inner light as our only true compass, to stop projecting our security, happiness, and identity onto external things, to discover the infinite power already within each of us, patiently waiting to be recognized, to embody an inner truth, and to evolve consciously, beyond all our illusions. This call of the soul is expressed by the Three of Swords, whose image evokes the mandorla of the world, the 2+1, which symbolizes the totality of being, its realization. And to realize oneself, from the English word realize, is to open the true eye, the third eye, the illuminated gaze. The mandorla, through its perfect oval, symbolically evokes the open eye, the true eye we've been speaking of. It is no longer the dualistic vision of the world, but the fully realized Trinitarian vision. It is to see through the eye of spirit, to perceive unity behind all appearances of separation. It represents the sacred space where the two polarities, two, find their point of union in a third, higher principle, one. In this mandorla, we rediscover the idea of an alchemical union that transcends conflicting duality and allows the emergence of a third force, higher consciousness, the third eye, the unified vision. This symbol reminds us that all suffering, symbolized by the sword piercing the heart on the Three of Swords, can be transformed into deep wisdom when we fully accept to pass through the initiatory ordeal it represents. The world arcana, then, precisely symbolizes this wisdom, which transcends the initial pain to reveal a new consciousness of oneself and of existence. Wisdom, or knowledge, deeply rooted in the arcana of the Hermit, finds its ultimate fulfillment in the world. Though seemingly very different in their expression, these two cards together illustrate a complete process of the evolution of human consciousness, from introspection to the ultimate realization of the self. The Hermit, depicted as an old solitary man walking slowly with his lantern, symbolizes the stage where the individual enters the depths of their own being. He represents that initiatory moment when, after confronting their illusions, the moon, after encountering their own limits and inner resistances, represented by Saturn, the individual finally turns inward, in search of a more authentic truth. At this stage, wisdom appears as a path that is patient, humble, sometimes painful, but always necessary. It is the result of a life lived in full awareness, and the recognition that no outer light can illuminate inner truth without first passing through inner darkness. It is here, in the inner darkness symbolized by the dark night of the soul, that the Hermit reveals his full greatness. The wisdom he embodies is not abstract knowledge, but a truth lived and tested in the flesh, acquired through the experiences and trials of life. The lantern he carries does not shine far ahead. It is rather an invitation to illuminate the present moment, step by step, to focus on the very center of one's being. The true wisdom, he teaches us, does not come from books or doctrines, but from a continuous process of internalization, introspection, and total responsibility for one's thoughts, emotions, and actions. But wisdom does not remain locked within inner solitude. When the individual reaches the final arcana of the tarot, the world, the wisdom accumulated throughout the Hermit's inner journey comes into full bloom. The world arcana thus symbolizes this wisdom that transcends initial pain, that goes beyond the apparent limits of the human condition to reveal a new consciousness of self and of existence. The world is that fully awakened consciousness, no longer lost in the extremes of the wheel of destiny, but settled in the full realization of self, aware that everything is connected, everything is unified. With the third eye opened, it no longer sees only duality, but clearly perceives the universal unity at the very heart of every earthly experience. The world is the perfect and fulfilled expression of that inner truth brought to light by the Hermit. Where the Hermit walks slowly, cautiously, and in silence, the world dances freely within the heart of a mandorla, a symbol of wholeness, unity, and eternity. Where the Hermit sought the light in solitude, the world embodies that light, radiant, integrated into the very fabric of existence. The wisdom manifested through the arcana of the world is thus the capacity to live fully in unity, to unite within oneself the masculine and the feminine, spirit and matter, the visible and the invisible, intuition and reason. It is this realized consciousness where the three of the Hermetic Trinity, thought, emotion, action, becomes one, harmonized in the dance of conscious existence. This integration is the ultimate key to wisdom, to true knowledge. What was once suffering becomes understanding. What was once struggle becomes acceptance. What was once separation becomes unity. Thus, the Hermit and the world respond to each other in a magnificent complementarity. The Hermit leads us inward, to find that patient wisdom which is born of self-confrontation, introspection, and the transcendence of the limits imposed by Saturn. The world then invites us to celebrate this wisdom in its full expression, in the perfect balance of polarities, and in the conscious realization of our unity with the entire universe. Ultimately, wisdom is the fruit of this initiatory journey from the Hermit to the world. A journey where the individual discovers that the highest truth lies in the realization that all is one. The world, through its cosmic dance, shows us that true knowledge is not limited to knowing, but lies in being, fully, consciously, in every moment, at the very heart of life. In this sense, the realization evoked by the world is truly the ultimate culmination of the path initiated by the Hermit. Man becomes a living embodiment of the one consciousness, perceiving every event as an opportunity to awaken further, rather than as an external fate. This is how one reaches true liberation, at the very center of one's existence, at the very heart of the world. So may the light of the Hermit guide our steps, and may his words resonate in every cell of our being.
I am the peace that slips into the human chest worn by war. I am the silence within the uproar, in the anomalies of the human heart, where good and evil are intimate accomplices, where light is hunted at every step by darkness, where its broadest knowledge is ignorance. I am the power that urges toward the better. Every experience is my long march toward the light. I am the high and solitary thought. Thus, slowly, I lift the soul of man closer to the light. When eternity takes time by the hand, when infinity marries finite thought, man will be able to free himself from himself. Then love shall walk unscathed upon the earth, and man shall be visited by intuitive light. Then shall the sacred union be fulfilled. Then shall the divine family be born, and light and peace shall belong to all worlds.